What's going on there, gunfighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the right way with God Almighty at the center, biblical Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. The 357 SIG is the topic du jour. One of the patrons recently asked me a question, asked me to discuss 357 SIG, and I thought, this happens all the time. Like, surely I've done an episode on this. If you guys have listened for a long time, you'll know for quite a while I did a lot of Better Know a Cartridge episodes. I thought, surely I've done one on 357 SIG. It's a cartridge that I like. It's a cartridge I have actual experience with. And I look through the archives, and unless I just can't find it, I never did. So here you go. Better late than never. The 357 SIG. I'm going to give you what I think I know about it, my thoughts on it. Then I'll go to some resources, which I'll try and remember to quote when I go there. But the 357 SIG. It has a rather peculiar distinction of being one of the only common bottlenecked handgun cartridges in quasi-common use today. I wouldn't call it common. I wouldn't call it obscure. It's bottlenecked, and that's nothing new. If you remember the 9mm, its predecessor, the 30 Luger, which predates the 9mm, and 9mm is what, 1902? The 30 Luger predates it. It was its parent cartridge, and it was a bottleneck cartridge. So bottleneck pistol cartridges are not new. However, they've never been what I would call mainstream, at least not here in America. Now, to give you kind of a why, I think this had some real teeth as to why. Not just to push another cartridge on the American people, that's not just to push another cartridge on the market that says Western on it or says Precision on it or whatever. But I think it started in a good place. And that place was, I could be wrong about the timeline, but I want to say it around the 90s. You might think the 90s, that's pretty recent, or at least I think that way. Not a lot's happened since then. In the world of ballistics, a lot has happened. In the world of policing, a lot has happened. I started as a law enforcement officer after my time in the Marine Corps in the mid-2000s. There were still police officers carrying revolvers. In the 90s, it would have been right in the middle of that big swing from revolver to semi-auto. There were law enforcement that carried things like 1911s back in days of yore, but they weren't common. They weren't the standard. It's standard was if you saw a law enforcement officer, a sheriff's deputy, or a local police department, or even a F.B.I in the 90s, he was likely going to have a 6-shooter on his hip. The 90s was about the time of that swing. Well, one of the things that the revolver had going for it, the ones that carried 357, and not all did, a lot still carried 38 Special or 38 Special Plus P, but the ones that carried 357 Magnum, it had a proven track record. It had street cred, right? It had some real chops as far as a good reputation for putting bad guys down. Specifically, a load that had good street cred was 125 grain hollow point, going at, let's say, around 1,400 feet a second. That had some real street cred. So, in this swing, SIG and maybe some others said, how can we duplicate this good performance that we see on the street that actually works, this 125 grain bullet, out of a semi-auto? Let's look at this. And they did. And whatever nerds and labs do and ballisticians do, they came up with a 357 SIG. And here's the thing. I think they accomplished their goal. Now, hold on. What I am not saying is that the 357 SIG is as versatile as a revolver in 38 Special 357. Nor am I saying that 357 SIG can be, when you hot load it, as powerful as 357 Magnum when you max it out and redline it. It's not. But that wasn't That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that street-proven load for defense against people, 125 grain at around 1,400 feet a second, give or take, and that could depend on, your bore diameter and the temperature that day and whatever. But rough numbers, right? It duplicated that, and it did it in a semi-auto. So, yeah, you're not going to do as well if you're trying to load a 180 grain hard cast, right? It's not meant for that. If you're going to load that 124, 125 grain-ish load, fairly hot, it does that. It does it in a semi-auto, and it does it in a manageable size frame. Now, this was also around the time that everybody and their mama was pushing 40 Smith & Wesson because it was the darling of the F.B.I. Now, I think that the 40 Smith & Wesson was one of the worst things the F.B.I. has ever done. And they've done some stuff. But as far as like tactics and ballistic stuff, pushing it, and I'm an F.B.I. handgun instructor, 40 Smith & Wesson is an abomination. That thing is a horrible, just a horrible choice in every way, shape, or form. It's like, how can we make everything worse about this gun? When we get worse than 45, how can we get worse than 9mm? Right in the middle, but worse in almost every way, any way you slice it. 40 Smith & Wesson. That said, because the FBI was pushing it, it took a long time for 40 Smith & Wesson to go where it deserved, which is dying. The 357 SIG always was, in my opinion, a better round. I think it got a little bit later start. It did catch on. There were several agencies, local and federal agencies, that did use 357 SIG. I think it always was the better choice. Period. If I was in the mid-90s or the mid-2000s or today and you said I have to choose between 40 Smith & Wesson and 357 SIG, I'm picking 357 SIG. It's a better round. Period. End of sentence. You could make some tests somehow, somewhere, maybe 40 would come out on top as long as you didn't take the shooter into account. But I'm going to tell you, in almost every way, I think the 357 SIG is superior to the 40. And that's kind of how we got 357 SIG, and it did see mild success, right? There were large law enforcement agencies that used it. There were federal agencies that used it. There were many local agencies that used it. It was nowhere near as popular as a 40 Smith & Wesson, but it's by no means obscure. A little bit about the cartridge, kind of an odd thing. You might think 357 SIG, it uses 357 diameter bullets. It does not. It uses 9mm bullets. 9mm, although very close, they're both 35 caliber. 9mm is .355, if memory serves correctly. I'm not looking it up right now, but .355 diameter of the 9mm. 357 is obviously .357 diameter. It doesn't actually use 357 bullets. It uses 9mm bullets. And because you're trying to put it in a fairly stumpy cartridge, a short overall length, most of them have to be flat-fronted, which I find no problem with. I like flat-fronted bullets better anyway. But just a little foible there, a little idiosyncrasy on the 357 SIG. It's not actually 357 caliber. But, I mean, you're arguing over thousandths of an inch. As far as, like, terminal performance goes, not going to make a difference. Let's look at what the Speer Reloading Manual has to say about the 357 SIG. Developed jointly by SIG Arms and Federal Cartridge in 1994. SIG is a powerful cartridge that can match the performance of 357 Magnum service revolver loaded with lighter bullets. Factory ammo has a nominal velocity of 1,350 feet per second. I said 1,400, and I like round numbers. But yeah, that's 1,350. With a 125 grain bullet, impressive performance from a compact semi-auto pistol. The first pistol chamber for this cartridge was the SIG 229. I think this is a typo here. It actually should be the P229, but hey, that's all right. Actually, one of my duty guns that I carried back in the day, but it was in 40, sadly. The cartridge has become quite popular and has been adopted by several law enforcement agencies. As you might imagine, this is an older manual. Why? Because older reloading manuals are cheaper on eBay. I'm not going to read you everything they have to say about that, but I'll give you some numbers that they list here. They list 125 grain Speer Gold Dot hollow point, as you would expect from a Speer manual. And it lists their hottest load here is 1437. That's hot. They list several loads here in the 1400 feet a second velocity range. That's a hot load. Not very common, but if you reload or you probably can find them, they do list 147 grain data at over 1,200 feet a second. Okay, I'm going to read you a little bit from Cartridges of the World, a gift from a patron. See if it has anything else to say. I'm just going to read what's relevant, not in toto. 357 SIG is loaded to a comparably high pressure level, the same as top factory 357 Magnum loads, and 14% higher than 40 Smith & Wesson or 9mm Luger. The combination of high pressure, reasonable case capacity, and no barrel venting, as seen in the 357 Magnum revolvers, allows this petite cartridge to generate significant ballistics, fully the equal of the 40 Smith & Wesson in terms of muzzle energy. However, in the typical short pistol barrels used, there was a price to pay for the level of performance. Muzzle blast is significant compared to the 40 Smith & Wesson. The 357 SIG has only one advantage, that being a slight reduction in recoil. Okay, my comments on that, yeah, for sure. It does have quite a muzzle blast in a 4 shorter inch barrel, much like 357 Magnum does. All right, back to my thoughts on the 357 SIG. I've used it. I like it. It's a good cartridge. I've carried one. I've hunted with one successfully. Trying to remember to make a picture of me hunting with that successfully on the cover. It's a great round. Well, why isn't it more popular? Well, here's the thing, and this is going to ruffle some feathers. It's a really good round. It's probably in the top 4 of pistol rounds of all time for defense. It's almost as good as 9mm. And that's why it's not more popular. More is not always better. Sometimes more is less effective. And for this, I'm going to use an example I've used before, but it's the best one that I know of because it's real-world first-hand experience. I was a law enforcement officer. I started out in the Marine Corps with a 9mm, the Beretta 92, but I went to police work. I was issued a 40, which is horrible. I quickly went to 45, not quickly, but sometime after that went to 45 ACP, a big caliber war at the time, bigger, better. Also, I was a decent shot for handgun for law enforcement for L.A.P.D, which is one of the more legit and longest law enforcement academies in the country. I was decent compared to L.A.P.D standards. Then I started getting into competition shooting. I shot my first competition with a 45. And that was very humbling. I quickly realized I wasn't very good with a pistol. I was good compared to the average cop. That's not saying much. It's like saying you're a good driver compared to the average 16-year-old girl. You might be, but that's setting the bar real low. I quickly decided I wanted to become a better handgun shooter, and I was going to stick to the competition thing. And I got a marvelous thing called a shot timer. And I shot on the clock. And I shot my 45, and I shot the 40, and I shot 9mm. And I quickly realized, and I knew about ballistics, and I've been a ballistics nerd since I was a kid. I quickly realized I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what the F.B.I. says. There's no way that you can tell me that the 45 or the 40 is a better choice for defense for shooting out of a full-size fighting handgun than a 9mm. Because I don't remember the numbers. This would have been in the mid-2000s. But I was getting several more hits in like a 2-second, if you know what a bill drill is. A reasonable, like 7 yards, A-zone, draw, however many shots you can get in 2 seconds. Generally, a good goal for that is like 6. That's with a 9mm. I wasn't getting anywhere near that, and I don't remember the numbers, with a 40 or a 45. And I thought, well, I don't care how much better you think 45 is ballistically. It's not that much better. So I went to 9mm, and this was still in the time when everybody said you had to have a 40 or a 45. 9mm, the common lure of the day was for shooting nothing more than anorexic poodles. But I was the one carrying it, and I was able to choose not whatever, but within the parameters of our policy and carry it. And I carried and not even a full size, a plus size, a long slide Smith & Wesson M&P It was back in the day when it was really the only two choices in a polymer was polymer striker fire was a Glock or when Smith & Wesson came out. And I used to be a Glock guy, if you can believe that. When the Smith & Wesson came out and I shot it, and I was like, well, I'm better with this, kind of like the 9mm. So I carried a long slide 9mm Smith & Wesson M&P Pro. Still have one of those. Won more competitions with that gun than any other. Sheer amount of competitions I shot with it for years and years and years. All that to say, more is not always better. 357 SIG is a fantastic round. It's better than 40 Smith & Wesson. It's not as good as 9mm for most people for most things. Now, you give me enough caveats, I could probably find a situation where I would choose it over 9mm. But 90+% of the time, you're better off with 9mm. And you know what really makes you good with a handgun? Training with a handgun. You know what that requires? Time, dedication, frustration, a lot of prayer, hopefully, and ammo. And ammo is cheaper with 9mm. So unless you just have a blue sky budget or you're the feds, with your blue sky budget as a taxpayer, as far as training goes or whatever, but if you're buying your ammo and let's say you have, I don't know, a $500 a month ammo budget, well, you can buy a lot more 9mm than you can 45 or 357 Magnum or 40 Smith & Wesson or 357 SIG. And the 9mm is not so good because it's so powerful. There are a lot of rounds that have been around a long time that are more powerful than 9mm. 357 SIG, 38 Super, 38 Todd Jarrett, 9mm Win Mag, 9x25 Dillon. These are just off the top of my head. I'm sure there's more than that. But that's not what it's about. It's about the best balance. And in a full-size fighting handgun of reasonable weight that you're going to carry, on my hip right now is a SIG 226 Legion. And that size handgun, 9mm, almost always is your best option. Because I don't care how good you control recoil, if you reduce it, you control it better. And if you get that marvelous thing called a shot timer and run it for yourself, you'll quickly realize that, yeah, you're probably better off with 9mm, unless you're just a raging caliber warrior. But you know what cures you with that? Kicking down doors with people trying to kill you on the other side. And you might think, well, you know, what looks cool on a magazine or what looks cool in the numbers in the ballistics charts is really less important than what's most effective to keep me alive. Is it a good caliber? It's a fantastic caliber. It's probably a worse choice for you than 9mm. Probably. If you're just going to have it as a hunting handgun, cool. If you're using a real niche application where you think the trade-off is worth it, okay. But make sure you're making it for a logical reason. Not just have it as a fun gun. It's a fantastic caliber. There's no free lunch. For the more power, you get more recoil, and you do, again, get that more muzzle blast. But the recoil is a bit more than 9mm. It's nowhere near as bad as 40 Smith & Wesson, in my opinion. And it's certainly in a full-size handgun. It's not bad. But it is going to cost you shot-to-shot recovery time. I don't care what pistol round you choose, whether it's 9 or 45 or if you don't like yourself 40 Smith & Wesson. None of those are substantially so powerful that you're not going to probably need several follow-up shots in most situations. You can get mad at that, but look at the numbers. And just to give you an idea, you probably are familiar with 9mm. This, to try and be fair here, I usually use rough numbers, but since I already had this reloading manual out, the Spear reloading manual lists 124 grain gold dot at 1249. Highest load. 1249, a little over 1400. 200 feet a second. It's a significant increase in the 357 SIG. Although, as far as on people, it's worth the longer shot recovery time. Again, I'm going to say in general, probably not. Certainly not worth the extra cost in ammo if you're buying the ammo in training. For most people, most of the time, says me. You do what you want. It's a good cartridge. You could do a lot worse. You could have a 40. But it's a good cartridge. Almost as good as 9mm for most uses. That's why the entire world has settled on 9mm. And you got to think about this. The 9mm has been embraced by every major power and a bunch of minor powers around the world for military and law enforcement. The Americans use it. The Chinese use it. The Russians use it. Europe uses it. Germany, the country that made it, uses it. Countries that hate each other on both sides use it. Why? Because it's a good balance. It's a good cartridge. It has been for over 100 years. .357 SIG is a more powerful version of that. You could think of it like a 9mm Magnum, but there is no free lunch. It's a good cartridge. I wish it was more popular. Will it see a resurgence? I would say a surgence. It never was that big. It should be bigger than it ever was, but probably not. Anyway, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you listening. It's a good cartridge. I'm glad I finally got an episode out on it. Better late than never. Tactical tip of the day. Mechanics probably know this. Gunsmiths probably know this. But if you're neither one of those things and you sometimes work on guns, a magnetic bowl, if you have one, they're cheap. Of all the money you spend on guns and ammo and gun stuff, probably have one. If you don't have that, just get a refrigerator magnet or two when you're taking apart a gun that has really small springs and pins and parts. I would like to get back half the time I spent crawling around on a floor looking for a little teeny tiny spring. That's your tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. My comments. Keep in mind, you have to know the truth. The truth is the truth, whether you know it or not, but you have to know it to be set free. What's the truth? God is truth. God's word is truth. Know God, know his word, know the truth. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.